Hello everybody, this is Mithril Zenith, and I'm back with another tier list. I know I always promise, hey, I'm not going to do another tier list whenever I'm talking about them, because the comments I get are always a little bit insane and unhinged, but that's fine, because I think honestly tier lists are still fun to do, fun to talk about, so let's talk about some Armor Knights, shall we? The Armor Knight video did pretty well. People loved that Armor Knight video until, at least for the first day, and got a lot of comments on it, a lot of interest in seeing what traditionally bad units can sometimes do. And so today I am talking about all the Armor Knights, and so I have included Armor Knights, Generals, and units that promote directly into Armor Knights, or are considered Armor Knights, generally. I did not select units that have branching promotions into Armor Knight but don't start as one, or units that are commonly reclassed into Armor Knight, looking at you, Wolf, and Sedgar. And for Three Houses units, I only considered Dedu and Gilbert, because no other unit in my, if my memory is correct, no other unit becomes an Armor Knight out of house. And so these are, quote, canonical Armor Knights, and that's like an easy path of how to use them. Did not include Great Knights on this list, so no Bunet, Dusel, or like the two other Great Knights, Frederick or Gunther. All just Armor Knights and Generals. First of all, we have the Unstoppable tier. This is literally just the Black Knight. I debated putting Wolf and Sedgar up here, but honestly, you have the Black Knight, you can use the Black Knight as a cheat code to win the level. Unstoppable tier on his own. Solid tier, these are units that generally you'll find some use out of if you choose to use them in their purpose of being an Armor Knight. We have Toronio from Radiant Dawn, who isn't available a lot, but when he is, he's just very good and very much worth using, especially compared to most of the rest of the Dawn Brigade, who tends to struggle unless you devote a lot of resources into a single unit. We have Effie, who a lot of the comments added to me that she is good in Conquest, but not necessarily for being an Armor Knight. She's good because you can reclass her into Archer or some other different stuff. She's good because she has very high strength, and her defense and HP are notable, but it's her strength that really makes her good. More so than her defense or wary fighter, stuff like that. Oswin, just good stats all around, high base level, good bulk growth, good strength growth, fast enough to not get doubled and to double many of the slower enemies of FE7. Just an all-around reliable unit. Gatry as well in Radiant Dawn. He is faster than he appears. He has like a 60% speed growth, so he actually can outspeed a lot of your army on a fairly regular basis, outside of units like Nephany who have or Mia, who have even faster, even higher speed growths, and can become one of your best combat units. Does suffer a lot, not just from his 1 point slower movement than the rest of your army, your foot army, but because armors take extra terrain penalties, and there's a lot of like bushes and whatnot that get in the way on the Grail Mercenary maps of Radiant Dawn. So has some mobility issues that are notable, but other than that, very solid unit. Dedu, early game, if you're playing Blue Lions Act 1, Dedu's passive +4 defense when you don't act is incredibly powerful. +4 base to a stat at a time when your stats are like maybe 10 is insane. It's absurd. He is the safest way to draw out the enemy bandits in like chapter 2 that are otherwise exceedingly dangerous. He's the best way to drag out the other students in the mock battle. He folds to magic, but you know, a lot of units fold to everything, and he does disappear for a bit, but when you have him, and sometimes after he comes back, he can be, you know, depending on how you build him, significantly far behind your army, whatever. But for that early game alone, he is very valuable and very useful in getting yourself up to speed, getting your units up to speed, particularly in like a no New Game Plus run. And I have Lucas in FE2 Gaiden. I put this version above Lucas from SOV because FE2 Gaiden has stuff like the Speed Ring, which completely negates Armor Knight's weaknesses, giving them a +5 move and maxing their speed at 40. And yes, you can also give the Speed Ring to like a flyer or a cavalry unit, but they actually kind of need the power from a weapon in order to really have effective combat, and they don't have the bulk to stay in combat all the time. Meanwhile, if you give it to an Armor Knight, the Armor Knight has the base power and has the base defense, they just don't have the mobility. So you give them the mobility and the speed, and they kind of run away with things. And if anything, I probably would move Force maybe to worth using sometimes, but I'm going to leave him in meme tier for... No, I'll put him at the bottom, worth using sometimes, purely for Speed Ring Baron shenanigans. Because Barons have the strength to operate without having a different weapon, whereas I think like Gold Knights really want to have like a Rider's Bane or a Silver Lance just to get that extra power to push them over the edge. Worth using sometimes tier, these are units that, you know, they're around, they might be filling the bottom of your deployment slot. If it's non-deployed, you'll probably bring them. If you have them, you'll use them, but you're not necessarily planning your strategies around them or deliberately building them up. Or there's some circumstantial stuff around that. For instance, for circumstantial stuff, we have Kiel and Ignatius, the two child units on this list, who, worth using sometimes, probably depends on who their parents are, what their skill inheritance is, what their setup is, what you build them into, if you are building them to be really solid units in a particular route, in a particular idea. I think they probably have a lot of potential benefit if you build them right, but if you don't, they just kind of are other filler units that exist. And so it's like, okay, how you build them really determines whether they're worth using. Apologies, my daughter is very upset at it being nap time, but she seems to be doing fine. If you hear her in the background, that's why. Going to the front of the list, Lucas from Shadows of Valencia. Because of the way Shadows of Valencia works with all of its weapons, and the fact that the Speed Ring is nowhere near as powerful as it was in Gaiden, SOV Lucas really does have more struggles. He's still worth using early game into mid game, and if you get him promoted to Baron, he can still be alright. He tends to get sniped out by witches because he falls behind and can get into rough situations, but if you use Warp with him and other stuff, you can set him up to be in very effective places. There's a lot you can do with Lucas, just because he starts out, he's pretty strong. He's strong before your villagers all get up to speed, and he can keep up that pace versus someone like Forsyth, who doesn't start nearly as high level, comes in later, comes in after you get other units, after your villagers have already gotten up to speed, and thus is a little bit harder to level up into Knight and into Baron and to get rolling. Lucas definitely has that upper hand. I think both can be made into solid units, but Lucas is a lot easier to make into that. And I'm also going to say worth using sometimes because SOV has so many other tools that make other units so much more broken. Well, even though Gaiden has like the most broken rings in existence. Oh, this music's a little bit loud. Maybe I can turn it down a little bit for you. Even though Gaiden has stuff like the rings that are incredibly broken, the weapons and the weapon arts are very, very good in SOV, and unfortunately lances are only kind of mid when it comes to that, compared to stuff like some of the swords have pretty good arts, and the bows, particularly Killer Bow, as everyone knows, are insane. So, unfortunately lances, after you get past, like, hey, Rider's Bane doubling is great, you know, that's about it. Enough talk about Lucas. Louis and Jade often get paired up with Sigurd for mobility. Louis definitely is better than Jade, I would say, because he has that early game presence. Jade kind of comes in at a point when Louis is just starting to fall off anyway in regular play, or you have a Louis that's so built up that he's like surpassing Jade. Jade supposedly has like the extra resistance from her passive personal skill to make up for that, but I don't find that her resistance is actually worth talking about, because resistance is only meaningful if you have a ton of it, and she does not have that much overwhelming resistance. And so as armor knights, they're okay. You can definitely build them up, especially on lower difficulties, to be unkillable, aside from magic and chain attacks. But on maddening, if you try to make them unkillable, the enemies will just ignore them, and if you don't, then the enemies will just kind of overwhelm them. Being break-proof is very nice, but as you go up in difficulties, it becomes more and more situational. The FE3 Armor Knights, FE3 Drog, and FE3 Shima are interesting because they're the only lance users that can use lances indoors. Everyone else has to dismount and is then sword-locked. That does give them a niche. How useful that niche is debatable. I think it gets a little bit overblown. Sure, you want to be able to use Gradivis in the final chapters of the final few maps of Book 2, but if you can't, it's not the biggest loss, because you're mostly using like Worm Slayers, Lady Blades, and then just like Silver and Brave Weapons, stuff like that. Does Brave Weapons exist in FE3? Maybe that's just an FE12 thing. Either way, using effective weapons and silver weapons, and it's kind of doesn't necessarily matter as much, but still a niche and still does provide some use. So I put him in worth using sometimes instead of just being memes. Drog in FE 11 and 12, DS Drog, is in worth using sometimes, but not as an armor knight. He's worth using because of his base speed, his personal speed, which if you class him out of armor knight is actually very good. So you can make him either a dark mage with some pretty decent speed, or you can make him into a pirate with very good speed. And then he can actually, maybe not on the hardest difficulties, but he can avoid doubling and sometimes even double with his very high speed. But then he becomes very frail and his defense is quite low. So it's actually kind of funny just how much of a different unit reclassing makes him, because of the way personal bases work. Worth using sometimes, reclassed, not as an armor knight. Valbar in both iterations, I'll just bring them together, is worth using sometimes because Celica's side has very little raw bulk, and Valbar is only bulk. He is defense with some strength, and that's about it. He's not going to hit very much, he's not going to, kill a lot of enemies. You don't have a lot of great lances on Celica's side. He's inaccurate, he struggles, he gets doubled, but he takes 1 damage, so he takes 2 damage because he takes 1 damage twice. And sometimes that's all you need. You just need him to hold a point for a minute while you retreat one of your mages or mercenaries and heal them up. He serves a role, he's worth using sometimes, he doesn't cost a deployment to use, he's pretty much all he needs to be out of the gate, doesn't even need to get kills and gain experience. Xavier, if you manage to go through all the hassle of recruiting him, is actually a fairly good general. I think he gets hate mostly because recruiting him is obnoxious, not because he's a bad unit. Is he a tremendously good unit? I don't think so, but I think he's definitely a very solid unit, and if you have a point in your army that needs to be filled, maybe your main unit is being fatigued, he's a good filler to throw in. Braum in Radiant Dawn, he's pretty good for the Act 2 maps he's in, and he can be somewhat decent in the occasional Act 3 map. I know there's the meme going around of you place him on the throne holding Ike, even at base, and he just doesn't, and you win the map, and it's like, sure, you can technically win the map that way. You'd probably be better served playing the map, getting experience, and picking up the bonuses and whatnot, but if you just want to win the map, he's a brain-dead way of winning the map. I think he's worth using sometimes, but I don't think he's as good as Braum or Toronio, mostly because his speed issues are so significant so significantly worse than Brahmin Toronio, and his defense isn't all that much better. If anything, it's kind of the same, maybe even a little worse. Not the worst Armor Knight in Radiant Dawn, but definitely not the best. Gilbert, I bring him in. He joins in Hunting by Daybreak for Azure Moon. He's fine. He's a lot of defense. There are some reclassing things you can do with him to give him other stats, to get his bases to class bases in other ways that make him usable and make him actually fairly good at specific jobs. I'm not super into the Three Houses meta, but I know that with all the options Three Houses has, it would probably be a disservice to put him anywhere below worth using sometimes, because almost any unit can be brought up to speed in Three Houses if you want to. Benny is worse than Effie. He's all about defense, but he comes in at a point where that defense is less valuable. He doesn't have Effie's overkill strength. He just kind of exists, and I want to put him under Forgettable or I Wish You Were Better, but I know that there are weird things you can do in Fates with stacking tonics and buffs and pair up and all that other stuff in order to get him to do crazy things even at base. And having a high base armor and base survivability has arguably some merit, so I'm gonna have to say he's probably worth using sometimes, even though I think he is probably more of a meme. In fact, I might actually put him as meme tier, and then someone's gonna get angry at me in the comments for it. So yeah, I'll put him under worth using sometimes, even though I really think he's a meme. Kevin from The Last Promise I put here also as a meme. Maybe he is just a meme. Yeah, I'll leave him down as a meme where he belongs. He doesn't take any damage during his join chapter, which is the best showing of an Armor Knight ever. And then his defense keeps up until TLP starts getting insane, in which case he falls off a cliff. But he's an example of having a basically unkillable unit, even if they're slow at killing things, can be very good up to a certain point where they just kind of fall off. And then I talked about Forsyth. He's worse than Lucas, but I think a tier difference between the two is reasonable to say. I don't think he's completely unusable. It is a game that allows you to grind and in some ways encourages it, and so I'm going to assume that you have some access to that and just penalize them a little bit for requiring that to get up to speed. Over in meme tier, we have the fun ones. We have Arden, who is fully meme tier. You can do some cool things with Arden. He has high defense at a time when few of your units do. He also takes twice as long to get anywhere as anyone else. He picks up the Pursuit Ring, which requires all of his movement in Chapter 2, and then he can't do anything else. Stuff like that. He's a fun meme, but he is a meme. Forsyth to be reckoned with is a fun meme, but is also a meme just because by that point, again, weapons so much better, so much more stuff you can do in SOV with weapons compared to Gaiden, and not enough out-of-the-box broken stuff with rings in SOV compared to Gaiden. The Armor Knight trio of Fire Emblem 6, also a meme tier. Boris is definitely the best one of these by far. He has surprisingly good speed and just kind of good stats overall, but most of the stats are more in his growths, not necessarily in his bases. Barth is all strength and defense. Again, this is kind of a common trend. All strength and defense, but his low skill is particularly bad. Like, it doesn't matter if you have low speed if you're taking 0 twice, but his low skill combined with the low hit of weapons at base means he's not hitting anything on return, which means he's kind of just a mobile wall at that point, who eventually will get chipped down, especially if you're fighting enemies that actually have a reasonable strength stat and a stronger weapon. And then Wendy is full meme. You use her because you think it's fun to train basically unusable units into usable quality, not because she's an actually good unit. Kellum is meme tier because he's kind of forgettable and forgotten. He has some really weird builds you can go with him with his reclass options, and having a defense pair-up buff, pair-up bot, defensive strength pair-up bot is not the worst thing in the world. There are definitely times when that's useful. On high difficulties like Lunatic, he kind of folds by himself, and thus becomes more of a pair-up bot than an actual unit himself, unless you're going, again, on one of these side class builds, in which case there's probably some value to him. I consider him more of a meme than anything else, but I'm also not super high in the 3DS era meta. So tell me what your favorite Kellum builds in the comments below. Toronio of FE9 is meme tier, mostly because I wanted to keep I Wish You Were Better tier to a single line, and I think that it's funny because he has Resolve as his personal skill. Resolve is always a funny tier, a funny meme skill that you can sometimes get some use out of, but oftentimes will just lead to that unit dying, so meme tier, funny. Meg is pain. I don't know if anyone's actually tried to train Meg. I know a lot of people have theory crafted. I have actually tried to train Meg, and she has some pretty good growths, but she needs a lot of bonus experience to catch up because she's not getting kills on map at base. And unfortunately, when you level units with bonus experience in Radiant Dawn, they only gain 3 stat ups, which doesn't take advantage of her growths, which then means she is growing slower than she otherwise would, which means she's not capping stats, which means she's not taking advantage of General's pretty good caps outside of speed, which is still better than Sage, better than Archsage caps. And so while I think she has potential, the amount of effort required to get her to use that potential is greater than pretty much any other Dawn Brigade unit outside of maybe Laura. Meme tier. Wallace. A lot of people get Wallace because they don't want to level their lords, and he comes in and, you know, is just a trash armor knight late into the game. Or you are forced to class him up in Lin mode, normal mode, and just hate life. So, meme tier in that respect as well. Wish You Were Better tier. These are all armor knights that, yeah, you could use them, but you're just kind of going to be a little bit disappointed and just wish they were better than what they are. Shima, Gilliam, Dawson, Hannibal. This is just, I'm testing myself if I remember them all right. Lawrence, Gatry, Braum, Draug, Lawrence, and Lawrence. All aspects of Lawrence. Shima in FE12 just is outclassed by so many other units in FE12, it's not even funny. Gilliam, he has 9 defense. He can die easily in his starting map if you send him against the fighters. He just kind of dies to them. Yes, I know that's the matchup you're not supposed to fight, but it's like he doesn't double. He sometimes gets doubled. He doesn't have amazing defense. And while he has decent growths, you have so many other units that want experience in FE8, especially the early game of FE8, that most people are not going to be giving it to Gilliam unless they are deliberately meming. So maybe he's a meme, but again, he's kind of down here because meme tier, I want to be a single line. Dawson, he's a bulky armor unit that comes in kind of after you stop needing, after you stop needing him. He comes into maps where you have a lot of moving to be done. He's not terrible. He's not the worst unit ever. But he's just kind of there. He's kind of inconsistent. And he doesn't really shine. In fact, I constantly second-guessed myself whether I put his portrait or Hicks here. But I put him in Wish You Were Better because I don't think he's totally forgettable. But I just wish he was a little bit better. Hannibal, definitely wish he was better with all the work you put in to get him, and then he just kind of... Okay, he can sit at the castle and then slowly die over the course of 2 turns to a bunch of wyverns who fly in, hit him, and fly out, and then he can't actually follow up and retaliate and kill them. He doesn't even get to take advantage of the Jugdrawl AI, where the enemy gets to equip whatever weapon is best for the situation, but you have to sit with whatever you have. So, yeah, wish he was better. He's unfortunately kind of mediocre. Gatry, pretty solid in the early game, but then he joins in and he's an armor knight in Path of Radiance after you already have 3 Cavaliers and 2 Flyers. He falls behind. He's not necessarily worth leveling up. He's decent if you do. I debated putting him into worth using sometimes, but I honestly think that he is worse than these other units, and putting him up with them is a little bit of a disservice to them. Same with FE9 Braum, just comes in and is not up to speed where he needs to be, and doesn't get there fast enough to really warrant using. It's like, it's the classic case of, you level them up, you get a usable unit, versus you level up other units, you get someone who's insane. And that's kind of what it comes down to. FE1 Drog, shout out to having one of the worst defense growths in the game at 10%. You use him for the first chapter or two, and then you bench him forever, and then he kind of never sees the light of day. It's really sad. Tragic, even. And then all versions of Lauren's. Somehow I forgot FE1 Lauren's. One moment. Just gonna do this. Yeah, and I guess because I'm breaking this, I have to move someone else. Sure. No, that's kind of a disservice to him. Sure. She honestly is just forgettable at that point in time. Lawrence is... He joins in super late. He fails to do anything meaningful against Camus in his join chapter, which, to be fair, most units fail to do a lot to Camus. And then you have massive wide open fields or a mountain to run all the way around, and he gets falling behind. FE1, he's even worse because he's locked to swords. He's just not a good unit. And he just kind of loses his hair here. That's so sad. Wait, hold on. I had FE1. Who is this? Is that just some other random general? That's some other random general. I don't know who that is. Okay, you've been promoted back to Wish You Were Better tier again. Yeah, who even is this? Why does he look exactly like Lawrence here? FE1 portraits. And then Forgettable tier, I could talk about him. It's Dolph, Macalon, and Roger. It's all the other Arcanea Armor Knights. Dolph, Macalon, Roger, Horus, and this guy from the end of TLP. They are the definition of filler units. I know that, especially in FE12, there's probably some things you can do with either Dolph or Macalon, what's one or the other, because they have a decent bow rank that you can actually make him into a sniper and then give him Parthia with only a single arm scroll or something. I think that's how it works. I don't remember for sure. And because I don't remember, and don't really care to remember, I'm putting him in Forgettable tier. So there's probably some world in which one of them is worth using sometimes. But all in all, they're copy-paste design units, and they feel very, very forgettable. But what are your thoughts on Armor Knights? How would you rank them? Have I forgotten anyone else? Do you enjoy using Armor Knights? Have you ever used an Armor Knight at all? Do you wish they would just stop existing? Do you wish they were super good? You know, what are your thoughts on Armor Knights? I don't know. Big shout out to channel members C2 Peekly, Enigmatic Mr. L, The Big Kerman 007, Bro Tutorman, NKO Rico. Doing this from memory. C2 Peekly, Enigmatic Mr. L, The Big Kerman 007, Bro Tutorman, NKO Rico, Miss Mesmerism, and Kumi. That's all 7 right now. For joining the channel, if you want to, so you can support for less than $1 a month. Thank you so much for all those who have done so, and for everyone who made 3,000 subs possible. More design content is on the way. I had a really stressful week and just needed something to put out, so thank you for watching this if you did. And until next time, this is Mythral Xanon signing out.